It is 4:47 in the morning in International Falls, Minnesota, and the thermometer outside is sitting at 26 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of the corn planted only a couple of weeks ago may never recover. Strawberry rows that were just reaching the point where the first fruit should have started appearing have been damaged. Tomato transplants that someone carefully bought from a nursery hardened outdoors for days, planted during last week's warmth and expected to carry through summer, are frozen. Their tender tissue has been damaged at the cellular level, and some of those plants are simply finished. But that is not even the part of this situation that concerns me most. It is May 21st, 2026, day 141 of the year, and today I want to bring this frost story down from forecast maps and warning graphics to what is actually happening on the ground. Because after weeks of hearing phrases like frost advisory, freeze warning, upper 20s, lower 30s, and below normal temperatures, it becomes easy for those words to blend together. They start sounding routine. But what those numbers represent is not routine for the farmers, gardeners, orchard owners, and communities dealing with them. So today I want to make this tangible. What has this spring's repeated cold actually done? Who is being hit hardest? And how much more damage could still be ahead? To understand where we are now, we first have to look at how this pattern developed, because this did not begin with one unusually cold morning in late May. The damage has been building for more than a month. This has been a spring marked by repeated cold intrusions across the northern United States, with frost and freeze events returning again and again before plants have had enough time to recover from the previous one. The sequence began around the middle of April. After a burst of summer-like warmth, temperatures plunged sharply across portions of the upper Midwest and Northeast. Within roughly 24 to 48 hours, places that had been enjoying weather that felt almost like early summer suddenly found themselves dealing with temperatures much more typical of early spring. Forecasters warned about consecutive very cold mornings. And that distinction matters. One freezing morning is damaging. 2 freezing mornings in a row can be substantially worse because vegetation gets almost no meaningful recovery period between them. That first major cold surge extended from the eastern Dakotas and northeastern Nebraska through western and central New York and into northwestern New England. Then, before many growers had even finished evaluating the first round of damage, another push of Canadian air arrived near the end of April. Michigan was hit again. National Weather Service offices issued frost-related warnings as temperatures were expected to fall into the 30s. Across parts of northern lower Michigan and eastern upper Michigan, growers were dealing with something especially frustrating, lingering high water and flooding during the day, followed by frost and freezing temperatures at night. Think about what that means for an agricultural operation. Fields already saturated with water, equipment access limited, roots sitting in vet soil. Then, nighttime temperatures fall low enough to damage tender vegetation. 2 completely different weather problems hitting the same farm at the same time. Then May arrived. And instead of breaking down, the cold pattern intensified. During the first part of the month, the lingering effects of the disrupted atmospheric circulation continued delivering repeated periods of below normal temperatures across the central and eastern United States. Some areas were running roughly 5 to 15 degrees below normal over multiple days, helping set the stage for an unusually chilly first half of May. By May 5th, freeze watches were already appearing across parts of Michigan. Agricultural meteorologists were highlighting May 7th and 8th as another period capable of producing widespread frost across sections of the Central Plains and Midwest. International Falls became one of the clearest examples of how persistent the cold had become. Overnight, temperatures dropped into the middle 20s, followed by additional nights in the upper 20s or near 30. That is not one isolated freeze. That is repeated exposure. Then, around the middle of May, the warnings returned yet again. Freeze warnings and frost advisories spread across large sections of Minnesota and western Wisconsin. The Twin Cities region was included in frost alerts. Parts of central Minnesota and western Wisconsin were placed under full freeze warnings. Farther northwest forecasters around Grand Forks warned that lows in the lower and middle 30s could generate frost across portions of Minnesota and North Dakota. So when I say this spring's frost problem has become serious, I am not describing one unlucky cold night. I am describing a chain of events. Mid-April, late April, early May, mid-May, and now another period of damaging cold. Each one landing on vegetation already weakened or delayed by the event that came before it. That cumulative effect is what makes this spring different. And to understand why, you need to understand what freezing temperatures actually do to a plant. When temperatures fall below freezing, water inside and around plant cells can begin turning into ice. As ice forms, the physical and chemical balance of the tissue changes dramatically. Cell membranes can become damaged. Water is drawn away from living tissue. Ice crystals can disrupt cellular structures. And once enough cells are destroyed, that tissue cannot simply repair itself when the sun comes up. A frozen leaf may turn dark and collapse. A fruit blossom may look normal initially and then brown from the inside. A young vegetable transplant may appear limp the following morning and never recover. The plant survives only if enough healthy tissue remains to produce new growth. And how severe that damage becomes depends on several things. The type of crop matters. Its stage of development matters. How long temperatures remain below freezing matters. Humidity, wind, soil, moisture, and local terrain matter. Moist soil can sometimes provide a small amount of protection because it stores heat more effectively than dry soil and releases some of that warmth overnight. A gradual cool down can also give certain plants a little more time to adjust. But a rapid drop under clear skies with very light wind is especially dangerous. And that is exactly the type of setup parts of the northern tier have repeatedly experienced this spring. There is another reason a late May frost can be much worse than an April frost. Timing. In April, many perennial plants may still be dormant or only beginning to emerge. Some row crops have not been planted. Fruit trees may still have protective buds rather than exposed blossoms and young fruit. A cold event at that stage can delay development without necessarily eliminating the season. Late May is different. By now, corn may already be above the soil. Fruit trees may have finished flowering and begun producing immature fruit. Berry plants are actively growing. Garden transplants have established themselves. Vines are pushing tender shoots. The plants have committed their stored energy to active growth. They cannot simply return to dormancy and wait another month. That is why a hard freeze at this point can turn from a temporary setback into permanent crop loss. And that helps explain why the temperature alone does not tell the entire story. 28 degrees in early April can produce one outcome. The same 28 degrees in late May can produce something dramatically worse, especially when the plant has already endured several previous freezes. Now let's look at the regions carrying some of the greatest exposure. Start with northern Michigan and the Traverse City cherry growing area. This region is one of the most important tart cherry producing areas in the United States. Every spring, growers enter a highly vulnerable period after the trees bloom and begin setting young fruit. Once immature cherries are exposed, freezing temperatures become especially dangerous. A single hard freeze during the wrong developmental stage can eliminate a huge percentage of a farm's potential harvest. In severe situations, losses can reach half the crop or considerably more. And northern Michigan has not been dealing with only one frost. The region has experienced repeated cold nights during exactly the period when orchards are most sensitive. That means the final damage assessment is not simply about what happened yesterday morning. Growers have to add together every cold event from April through May. That cumulative toll could become significant. Then there is the upper Midwest grain belt: Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota. Large sections of these states have repeatedly fallen beneath frost advisories and freeze warnings throughout May. Parts of northern Minnesota have experienced temperatures around or below 30 degrees, cold enough for forecasters to warn that sensitive crops and vegetation could be killed. Frost alerts have also extended through parts of northwestern Iowa, northeastern South Dakota, and large portions of North Dakota. For grain producers, the challenge is broader than simply whether one plant freezes. Farmers are trying to establish corn and soybean crops while soil temperatures remain low, fields in some areas stay wet, and new cold events keep returning. Every delay costs time. Every damaged field raises the possibility of replanting. Every replanting decision adds seed, fuel, labor, and equipment costs. And every week lost in spring shortens the amount of growing season left before autumn cold eventually returns. Specialty crop growers in Wisconsin and Minnesota face another version of the same problem. Soil temperatures across portions of northern Wisconsin have remained only in the middle or upper 40s. That is still far below the preferred range for many warm season crops. Pumpkins and squash generally need much warmer soil to establish efficiently. Melons prefer even warmer conditions. So growers are facing a difficult choice. Plant too early and risk cold soil plus frost. Wait longer and lose valuable days from an already limited northern growing season. The cold does not have to kill the crop directly to create financial damage. Sometimes it simply compresses the entire production calendar. Farther east, the Finger Lakes, western New York, and parts of New England have experienced repeated cold as well. Earlier, hard freezes extended into northwestern Pennsylvania, western and central New York, and northwestern New England. Those same broad regions have remained vulnerable through May. Wine grapes across the Finger Lakes are sensitive once new shoots emerge. Apple orchards become increasingly vulnerable once blossoms open and young fruit begins developing. Specialty farms across Vermont and New Hampshire are also exposed when vegetation is pulled forward by warmth and then hit by renewed cold. And there are three major reasons this spring has become so damaging. The first is what happened before the cold. Late March and early April brought significant warmth to many northern states. That warmth pushed vegetation ahead of its normal schedule. Buds opened early. Trees flowered early. New leaves emerged. Gardeners began planting. Some crops moved forward by what felt like 2 or 3 weeks. So when the cold pattern became established, it did not hit a landscape that was still waiting for spring. It hit vegetation that had already responded as though spring was well underway. That dramatically increased vulnerability. Factor number 2 is repetition. One hard frost is one problem. A hard frost followed by several cool days, followed by another frost, followed by another cold surge, is something else entirely. Plants need time and warmth to recover. They need to rebuild damaged tissue. They need to replace leaves. They need to redirect energy. But if another freeze arrives before that process is complete, the second event strikes an already weakened plant. Then the third event hits something weaker still. A plant that barely survives frost number 1 may fail during frost number 2. A plant that survives 2 events may finally lose its growing point during the third. That is the compounding damage we have been talking about all spring. The third factor is uncertainty. Spring weather across the northern United States has been especially difficult to lock down because the jet stream has remained highly amplified, allowing repeated Canadian air masses to push south. That means the usual calendar guidance has become less useful. A farmer may know the historical last frost date. A gardener may wait until the traditional safe planting weekend. But if the atmospheric pattern keeps delivering cold beyond that normal window following the calendar, does not guarantee protection. And that is exactly what has happened. Which brings us to the current forecast. As of May 21st, the frost risk across the far northern United States cannot yet be considered permanently finished. That is important. The broader circulation pattern responsible for repeated cold outbreaks has not completely disappeared. Long-range forecasts earlier this month continued highlighting the possibility of another significant dip in the jet stream near Hudson Bay, opening the door for additional cool air to move into the Midwest and Northeast. Forecasters had already warned that another round of frost could occur in the Northeast, with freezes possible farther northwest, even after the typical last frost dates had passed. For northern Minnesota, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the Dakotas, and northern Wisconsin, the historical frost window normally begins closing from late April through the first half of May. We are beyond that period now. But beyond average does not mean impossible. It means less common. And during a spring dominated by repeated southward pushes of Canadian air, the usual statistics provide less reassurance than they would during a stable year. The period I am watching most closely is around Memorial Day weekend, roughly May 23rd through May 26th. Longer-range guidance has continued suggesting that another cooler air mass may attempt to enter portions of the northern plains and upper Midwest during that window. I do not want to overstate the details several days in advance. The exact temperatures will change. The coldest corridor may shift. Some locations that currently look vulnerable may avoid frost completely, but the larger signal remains important. The troughing pattern across the northern United States has not completely broken down, and for crops that have survived several marginal freezes already, even another borderline event could be enough to turn stress into loss. So here is what you can actually do. If you have tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, basil, or other tender plants outside, keep frost cloth and row covers close. Do not pack them away because the calendar says late May. Keep them somewhere you can reach quickly. In this kind of pattern, a frost threat can become much more serious within a relatively short forecast window. You may need to cover plants the same evening that your local forecast changes. Second, pay attention to your exact local forecast rather than a broad regional headline. A frost advisory and a freeze warning are not the same thing. A marginal frost night in the middle 30s can damage the most sensitive plants, while many protected crops survive. A night at or below 32 degrees for several hours is a different category of threat. Warm season vegetation can be killed. Know what has actually been issued for your county. And know your terrain. Official temperatures are usually measured under standardized conditions. Your field does not necessarily live under standardized conditions. If your garden sits in a valley, river bottom, depression, or other low area temperatures can fall several degrees lower than the nearby official observation. Cold air settles downhill. A forecast of 34 degrees does not guarantee your lowest field stays at 34. Your plants may experience 30, or neotuve, or lower. Those few degrees can determine whether you wake up to healthy vegetation or serious damage. For larger agricultural operations, soil moisture also deserves attention. Moist soil stores and releases more heat overnight than extremely dry soil. When appropriate for the crop and field conditions, watering before a marginal frost can sometimes provide a small thermal buffer. It is not magic. It will not save a crop from an extreme hard freeze. But in a borderline situation, even 1 or 2 degrees can matter. And finally, this is not only about agriculture. Check on older people in your family or neighborhood. Late season cold catches people off guard. By late May, some households have already stopped thinking about heating. People may have shut systems down. They may not have warm clothing immediately available. Someone living alone in a poorly insulated home can become vulnerable when nighttime temperatures unexpectedly fall into the upper 20s or lower 30s. A quick phone call costs almost nothing. So here is where things stand. This spring has delivered a prolonged frost and freeze pattern across the northern United States, beginning in mid-April and continuing deep into May. The damage has accumulated rather than occurring all at once. Early warmth pushed vegetation forward. Then repeated cold struck plants during increasingly vulnerable stages. Recovery periods were short. Additional freezes returned. Soils remained cold in many northern areas. And the atmospheric pattern responsible for sending Canadian air south has not completely disappeared. The final agricultural damage from this spring may take time to fully calculate. Cherry orchards, apple growers, vineyards, market gardens, corn and soybean operations, berry farms, home gardens, all have faced different versions of the same problem. The calendar says May 21st, but this spring has repeatedly demonstrated that the atmosphere does not always cooperate with the calendar. So do not put the frost cloth away yet. Keep checking the overnight forecast. Pay attention to what happens across the northern plains and upper Midwest heading toward Memorial Day. And if another cold night appears, prepare before temperatures fall rather than after frost begins forming. We will continue watching the pattern. Until next time, stay aware, stay prepared, and do not assume the cold is finished simply because the calendar says it should be.